Hi, my name's Scott the Miniature Maniac. Me and my friends just wrapped up a 6-month-long escalation league for Age of Sigmar, where we went from 500-point armies all the way up to 2,000-point armies. In this video, we're gonna show off those beautiful armies, talk about some army painting tips to make it easier for you guys. We're gonna chat about the escalation campaign experience and what we would change a second time around if we wanted to make it better, in case you guys wanna do the same thing with your friends.
Hi, I'm Dan Malson. I played a heavily converted Cities of Sigmar army. Little bit of allies, but mostly just the Cities of Sigmar.
I'm Evan. I played Stormcast Eternals, the best army in Age of Sigmar.
I am Alex Davey, and I played the motley collection of old sprues that was the previous Cities of Sigmar army book.
My name is John Schaefer. I play the Maggotkin of Nurgle in our escalation campaign.
Hi, my name is Scott, and I played the Soulblight Gravelords. I've been painting minis since I was in 4th grade, which I think is 10 years old, so I'm 31 now, so that's about 21 years in the hobby.
25 years? I'm 39. Yeah, so I've been doing it for about 25 years. That's a long time. I started out with Chronopia and Mutant Chronicles Warzone. This was back in the days of just like the bases were painted green and it was all like Gary Morley, 2 arms up kind of GW poses.
I have been painting miniatures now for about 5.5 years. I started painting minis for my D&D campaigns, what was that, late 2018, something like that.
Ooh, how many fully painted forces do I have? Well, I know John Schaefer's gonna blow me out of the water on this one.
No, a lot. Very, very many. I've been doing Games Workshop stuff for a super long time, so I don't know, probably 20 or 30.
I had a fully painted Tau army, and then I got really into fantasy, and I painted a big Empire army, and that's the first army that I painted that I was like really proud of. And then I have one, thanks to the League, I have one Warcry warband.
It's a little bit hard to know how many armies I have painted because they're in like various states of completion and then maybe they're technically legal, but the ones that are actually like really fully complete is the Vampire one, obviously. I have a Kill Team for Kill Team. And also I have a fully painted Wood Elf army that isn't playable in AOS right now, but at some point was. That one was never 2,000 points like my big and fancy Vampire one though.
I have a bunch of smaller forces and things like kill teams, but as far as full armies, this is the first full army since I think I had a 2,000-point Goblin force done when I was like a 12, 13-year-old kid.
I'm not gonna count my Age of Sigmar army as a fully painted one, which is too bad. I've put in a lot of work. I have about 2,000 points of mostly painted Stormcast dudes. But my only other fully painted army is my Song of Ice and Fire primary faction, which is Night's Watch, and that is fully painted.
There were 6 people in the Escalation League, and the point of the Escalation League was to end it with a fully painted army. And by the end, 3 people had fully painted armies, 2 had portions of painted armies, some large, some small, and 1 person wasn't able to paint as much because life got in the way, and that's totally normal. 6 years ago, when I participated in a Reddit challenge called Trial of the Warlords, there were 207 people that got involved. And do you know how many people actually finished by the end of the 6 months painting a 1,000-point army? 13 people out of the 207 that originally enrolled. Life gets in the way. Failure is okay. If you're like trying to paint an army and you're struggling to find time and all that thing, it's like, don't get down on yourself. Like, everyone is in that boat. Like, your hobby shouldn't pressure you. If it pressures you, I feel like it's kind of failing in a way. It should bring you joy and it should be fun. So if you're kind of in that boat and you're struggling to get your armies and your figures painted, like, don't worry about it. Everyone's kind of also struggling in that same way, and you'll find time. You'll find time. Well, after that surprisingly uplifting sentiment, let's hear a briefer from this video's sponsor. Black Site Studios is back with another game from the budding Malev microverse called Pit Lord. On a brutal alien planet set against a cosmic space fantasy backdrop, you play as a gladiator fighting for your life. Confined to a small 6-inch by 6-inch play surface, hence the genre microgame, your task as a peerless gladiator hailing from an alien culture is one of survival and entertainment for the masses of megalithic Megapolis, a massive arcane living city that sprawls across the planet. If you enjoy demonship, odds are you'll have a lot of fun with Pit Lord as well. Malev and the team at Black Site heard your feedback on Demonship and have addressed it with this game, which features an arena booklet in the main boxed set, allowing you to play right out of the box without needing to purchase or craft a board. There's also a MDF kit that can be used to build the arena and various traps needed to play Pit Lord. This also doubles as storage for the game's components, a wonderful quality of life idea. Pit Lord builds off of the mechanics introduced in Demonship and turns them on their head and up to 11. Each weapon and its unique attack patterns are represented by illustrations with a deck of over 45 cards to slash your way to victory. Do you think you have what it takes? Psych! There's no choice, only combat. Fight! This game is available on the Black Site Studios website for pre-order, link in the video description below. They plan to begin fulfillment in January after the holiday season. Thank you to Malev and Black Site Studios for sponsoring this episode. I think one of the most important things for army painting is realizing that models look better in a group than they do individually. So you can really cut a lot of corners to make at least the batch painting for your units a lot faster with very minimal loss in quality. But that's just it. You have to identify as an individual what you're happy with in terms of quality of outcome. First, figure that out with some test paint jobs, time the paint jobs, see what works for you, and then once you've kind of figured out a rough battle plan, then move forward. Also, make it personal. The more you have creative ownership over the project, I think the more motivation you'll get to get through the project.
Stop planning, start doing. That was my process, was as soon as I had my first models assembled, I wanted to be touching them, painting them, everything. And that did mean that I was coming up with scheme on the go, the whole thing. But it was really important to not get caught up in the, perfect being the enemy of good kind of thing where you're, oh, well, do I want to do this with the cloaks or this? It's like, no. Just put paint on the model. Even if you're not happy with the first 5 guys that you paint, there's going to be another 50. You're going to get better at it. Just power through. And then you buy another unit to just push those old ones off the field as they, release new garbage that you have to buy.
I would try to find a way to compartmentalize it. So it's, I think it's really daunting to sit down and not play with an army until it's completely painted or anything like that. But I still like to play with painted miniatures most of the time. So I will almost always try to paint up a 500 point force and just get it on the table to play a game. So this escalation was perfect for it. I always kind of view army projects as ongoing things that I'll go back to. I'll keep playing with this same Nurgle army for years and periodically go back and add some more paint to this or that just because it would be fun to do. Or sometimes I decide that, oh, I want to make the bases snow bases and decide to rebase the whole thing.
I would suggest, first and foremost, it has to be a process that you enjoy. You can't just be doing it for the end result. You have to actually enjoy the journey, or it's just not, you're just probably not going to get there. Because if it's pulling teeth just to sit down at the painting table, it's going to be tough to get through an entire army. Don't paint too neatly, because it's easier and faster to correct mistakes than it is to perfectly color inside the lines every time. Every big army project I've ever done, I've gotten it to the, looks good from 10 feet away stage so that I can put it on the table and play with it. And then I will go back in and now it's time to put another layer of highlights on and finish this. Now it's time to put some freehand on the banners because you don't want to be bogged down on that necessarily.
I would say I'm probably the most proud of the characters and the variety of characters I have for the army. Also really proud of the General on Griffin, the Free Guild General on Griffin, which is kind of a remake of Lowen Leoncoeur, the old Bretonnian king. Basically, it's the idea of him being reborn, but showing that on the base and actually painting something that big. I've never actually painted a model that's that big before.
I wish that I was the most proud of my dragons. I put all that work into putting the LEDs in their mouths and the whole thing. And I'm not completely disappointed with it, but God, it was a lot of work for kind of a medium level payoff. I guess I'm just kind of proud of the fact that I did paint roughly 2,000 points worth. It is mostly done. I also was injured right at the beginning of the Escalation League. I was yeah, I'll gung-ho about painting. Then I adopted a cat, and my cat bit me as I was breaking up a fight. So I couldn't hold minis to paint them for 2 months. It sucked really bad.
The one thing I'm most proud of, as this is my first ever fully based and fully painted 2,000 point army, is that I just did it, I've never had my own army. The only army I've ever fully painted that was a legal playable army was a Blood Angel army commission. That took me 7 years to finish, and that belonged to someone else. I never have owned that kind of thing. So just finishing that and kind of like joining like the club. There is no club, but you feel like you enter a new club of people who have fully painted armies. That meant the most to me. And also that I didn't like speed paint through it and like kind of not care about the quality. I'm really happy with the outcome of the whole army and that I actually finished it. Like it's just huge. Like I'm such a flighty person that for me to stick to a project like this and actually finish it was big for me.
I would say the Bright Wizard and Galen and Doralia Van Denst, the Take Your Daughter to Work Day Witch Hunters, turned out really well. I'm really happy with them.
Something I learned about army painting while painting my army. I have a scheme that I really like from a thematic level and that I think looks good holding it up close, but I think it's too dark. Ultimately, at least from my standpoint at the table, and maybe this is because I'm an old man, I'm going blind or whatever, I like colors that pop when you do a scheme and you're like, yeah, this is cool, it's grimdark, whatever, and then you put it on the table 6 feet away from you and you're like, oh, I gotta go way harder with the OSL now. I think I should have gone brighter on capes. I think I chose black for the armor color. That may have been a mistake.
For the kit bashing side, having consistency with things, doing full units versus doing just like single characters. I frequently tend to do just one-off kind of ideas and then just having consistency, especially with like 60 to 90 troops that are the same unit type, basically. Building off of that same concept, having a little variety here and there to kind of make it more dynamic and interesting, but still keeping that consistent idea.
One new thing I learned while painting my army was getting better at freehand. I did a lot of freehand banners in the army and they weren't like super long processes, so that was fun to experiment with that.
Yeah, I think I learned how to paint a really nice fire. I just kind of did my own thing and did a lot of experiments, and I found out that if you base coat like an incredibly bright white, and then you just build up oranges and yellows and reds, you get this really vibrant effect. It takes a long time, and you kind of have to just do it sort of intuitively. But I'm really happy with how that turned out, and I think all the fire effects look great.
While painting my army, I fret about technique so much. I am very in my head about what I am doing, how long it's taking me, if it's worth doing. I'm constantly revising my paint plans, trying different things. I never really stay in one place for too long because I'm just constantly questioning, is this the right thing? Like, I have no idea. It kind of sucks sometimes, but other times it's good because you try new things a lot and learn a lot, I guess.
Each new unit, I would introduce something new and different, but ultimately speaking, mostly it's about, I've got a lot of stuff to do. Not just painting an army, I have to, let my dog out and all that stuff. So it's time efficiency, time efficiency, time efficiency. I think my primary concern was just keep doing. Because as long as you've got your brush on your model, that means that things are happening, as opposed to thinking about like, oh yeah, well, if I use this technique, well, in the long term, it's like, no, just keep working.
I'm definitely like a planner, and I am probably overly meticulous. I wish I could be a little bit freer. Someone like John can kind of sit down and just start with a rough color palette and start slapping paint on and getting pretty creative with it. I will pretty much research every color and test it out and like figure out my process, and I'll have like a whole notebook full of every like paint recipe before I commit to it. And that's just kind of how I am. I'm very much a perfectionist.
If I were to do the escalation campaign a second time around, I would definitely shorten the experience because we were all not super keen to play our games toward the end, like in the 1800 and 2000 point bracket, which is really where Age of Sigmar seems to come alive. Despite the length of the campaign, I did like how we slowly introduced rules into Age of Sigmar at every single point bracket, because there's a lot to bite off and chew with Age of Sigmar, and kind of limiting that window for me was helpful for me to just kind of focus on the things that mattered in that particular week.
I thought it was fun. It was a good kind of like easing into the rule set in general. I think that we all uncovered the game didn't really play as well at smaller points levels because certain armies had big advantages. Like I could summon like a whole other army, you know, in certain scenarios and stuff. So I would say maybe starting at like a higher points value, like maybe at 1,000 points. I think the 500 and like 750 point games were they're just a little skewed, and I think jumping off at 1,000 points would have been my recommendation. But it was fun either way.
We started our campaign with the idea of we'll learn rules on the go. In retrospect, I think that was a mistake because it felt like every game for the first half of the league was like, not only do I have to learn this new unit that I'm running because my army grew and whatever my opponent's doing, but now also I'm adding on another core rule of the game that I'm like, oh wait, I didn't use that last time.
I might make it a little shorter. I think we all kind of got league fatigue by the end. You know, it's a lot of games to play. It's not a light game.
If I changed anything, either pushing for things to be more narrative, having like explanations for why you're adding a specific unit to your army, things like that. And I think doing like a set army thing would have been, I think, a little bit more interesting, although I wouldn't have gotten as much stuff painted if we would have done just the set army, I don't think. So.
Which faction was your most difficult matchup in the campaign?
Yours. Yeah, Soulblight at the end was rough, definitely. I think once you got the new book, and then you got a lot of ways to just mitigate my disease that I could put on your characters, and then also bypass my disgustingly resilient saves. Strong. It's very good.
Early on, Nurgle was very, very hard with the summoning. John was nice enough our first game not to summon double the points he started with, because he could.
My most difficult matchup was definitely Evan's Dragons in his Stormcast Eternal. There was definitely a tempo shift in the campaign when he started including dragons in his list.
The dragons go burr.
He felt a little bit unbeatable at that point, but then toward the end of the campaign, then my army became the OP one.
Obviously, Soulblight Gravelords, because they're wicked overtuned. Ultimately, I don't think that there was a matchup that I was just like, oh, this is an auto lose or something like that. Hot take time. I think AOS might be the most fun war game that I've played. I don't know that it's the best war game, and it's not my favorite war game. My favorite war game is still Song of Ice and Fire. AOS, more than any other game that I've played, makes me like excited for an upcoming game. I don't really get excited to play Song. I enjoy the competitive aspect of it, but I don't like look forward to it the same way. While we were in the depths of the league, I was like excited for each upcoming game, which is weird for me. Now that said, it's, you know, Calvin Ball. Like there's so many rules and all this stuff is happening and there's no way that you're gonna know what your opponent's force is gonna do. And there's gonna be like 5 times a game where you go, what? Your guys do what now?
I think it's a good game in general. I've grown to like it a lot more, but I think that, you know, it has some elements about it that I find a little frustrating from time to time. The double turn, I think, is like just a mechanic in general that I'm just not really suited to. I'm really accustomed to like back and forth. Everybody gets an equal opportunity to respond.
I still feel like the double turn is hard, and as someone that isn't ever going to be that competitive player that will only ever play casually just based on the time I can invest in the game, having a mechanic that realistically needs more of a time investment to really play into it. I would need to know everything that every army kind of does. I feel like that still swings games, and as someone that works at a retailer, having that entry point be a little bit tough where it has that more investment that you have to put into it, you have to put a ton of reps into it. I'm not as keen on that versus something where you can pick it up and at least get core concepts immediately.
My thoughts on Age of Sigmar after playing 12 to 15 games are that the type of randomness in the game undermines the strategy at play to the point where it's just not enjoyable for me. It emphasizes too few moments in the game as being important, and those moments are reliant on dice rolls. And so it can feel like you can lose the game with 3 critical dice roll failures as opposed to like, 15 to 20 critical dice roll failures. Despite that though, the armies in AOS are so insanely unique. It's like when you buy an army book, you're like buying a whole new game almost. There are so much extra rules for each faction to give it life and just flavor. And I freaking love that. I love that. I love feeling like I have ownership and I'm special with my army and that not everyone is the same as me. So that's honestly huge for me.
I'm really torn on the game system itself because there's a lot of stuff that I like, but I think my fundamental critique of the system is that they didn't build a broad enough rules foundation to support how much faction diversity and rules diversity they want to have. In old Warhammer Fantasy, you had strength, toughness, and you had a dynamic armor save that was impacted by your strength level. So you would roll to hit. You need to have weapon skill as well. So you'd roll to hit, then you would compare the strength of your weapon to their toughness to determine your wound roll, and then you would take their armor save and everything that was, over strength 3 would reduce their armor save. Intrinsically, by having these different stats, you would have a lot of diversity that was very understandable by your opponent. They've kind of gotten there in Age of Sigmar, but they've done it by adding like a special rule for everything. So it's not really easy to understand what anything does. You have to ask everybody like, well, what is different about it? Well, it's got its own bespoke special rule. It's got its own thing that it's doing. They have this narrow foundation that I believe they did to keep it simple, but unfortunately to keep it interesting, to take something and give each army book its own diverse feel, which I think is important, and people want their army to feel different from other armies. There's a million rules that you have to learn for your army, and then there's every other army that's coming in has its own millions of rules. There's a whole bunch of like general rules that you have to know, and then every season has another whole set of things. It's a hat on a hat on a hat on a hat at a certain point.
Well, gang, that's gonna do it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed the post-mortem on our escalation campaign. If you're curious like what restrictions, what missions, and at what point totals we played the game, I'll have that in a spreadsheet down in the description below. Also down there, I'll have further formats for playing at lower point totals for AOS and how to balance that. Rob, the Honest Wargamer, shared that with me and that'd be helpful for you. If you enjoyed this video, I have other videos about Age of Sigmar and our escalation campaign that I'll link at the end of this video. If you like the channel and you want to support it, there are a number of ways to do that. Most notably, Patreon is a great option. Also, my merch store, Miniac.co, where you can find cool things like cutting mats and t-shirts with my logo on it and other various art. But you can also find there the Duchess, a model that I make and produce, and also a digital masterclass that goes along with it, teaching you how to paint the box art brushstroke for brushstroke. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint more minis!